أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
So the last lecture that I did was on our first of all, Assalamu alaikum. My apologies. We spoke about worldview and the tools of knowledge in the last lecture. So I'll just do a quick recap. So there's three main tools of knowledge, right? One is the five senses. This is the most basic tool of knowledge. As you grow, there's intellect, your aql. It's an even wider range. And then finally there's wahi, which is revelation. Okay. And we discussed how these three tools of knowledge, they each have their own domain and their limitations. We talked about how these inherently shape our beliefs and which shape our worldview. Okay. So a religious worldview, let's begin with a materialistic worldview. So a materialistic worldview purely is based on the five senses. So we talked about how science, right, when they say God doesn't exist, technically they're wrong, because what they're trying to say is we don't know if God exists. Their five senses cannot tell them if there is anything beyond what they can materialistically perceive. So to understand those abstract concepts, you'd have to refer to intellect. Once you accept your intellect, right, and the five senses, you begin to process the world around you. You begin to think of its origins. You begin to think what happens afterwards. And your intellect will either lead you back to a materialistic worldview, or you'll look for wahi, for revelation. Because if you truly think about the world, right, if you use your intellect, you will eventually accept that God exists. And when you accept that God exists, you will have to refer to wahi. And that leads to an Islamic worldview, which encompasses all of this. Islam includes the five senses, what you perceive materialistically. It also includes the intellect, how you think about things. And finally, it includes the wahi. But to get to wahi, you need to understand the five senses. To get to intellect, you need to get through the five senses, and so forth. Eventually, the Islamic worldview is reaching Allah and having tranquility despite loss of materialistic things. So it's also inclined towards hope. And again, your actions back your worldview. So you can't just have knowledge and beliefs but not act upon it. So acting it reinforces that. And every effect has a cause. So we're going to talk about that today.
So I have a quick question. So this worldview, you're saying Islamic worldview. Are you saying that there's only like a generalized Islamic worldview in terms of how um, we just understand the world, just at that basic level?
So I'd say it's multidimensional. So we understand it from a materialistic sense, but we also understand it from
the Islamic perspective, right? So you're saying that there's a materialistic worldview, and then there's an Islamic worldview.
Yeah, so Islamic worldview is separate from a materialistic worldview. Yeah, that's what I meant. Go ahead.
So you're saying that there's two different worldviews, right? There's the materialistic and the Islamic worldview, right? Are you saying that there's only one Islamic worldview, or is there different ways of understanding the worldview through the Islamic lens?
So different ways, right? So some people have a materialistic way of understanding Islam, right? They look at it from a materialistic lens, but they accept Islam. Like they ask questions through that lens. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they won't, what's it called? So for example, the concept of sacrifice, right? That requires you to let go of something, that's materialistic, right? So if someone believes in Islam, but they have a materialistic worldview, that sacrifice will be much more difficult for them compared to someone who comes from, let's say, an Islamic.
In Islam, the worldview, there's only one worldview for Islamic.
Yeah, there's one true worldview. That's the godly worldview.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're saying that it's based off of these five things. Is there anything else that comes under that worldview? Is there anything else that you know or come to understand
So Wahi encompasses everything, what you know and what you don't know, right? Revelation, right? It encompasses physics, it encompasses chemistry, everything. It's religious knowledge as well as non-religious knowledge, right? Because God knows everything, right? And that knowledge is accessible to us. Not all of it, but a lot of it to a great extent. So, for example, like the Islamic Golden Age, right? We had a bunch of scientists. So, what did they do? They looked at the world through an Islamic worldview. They studied science through that worldview. So it was like studying God's creation. It wasn't just understanding the world and then making theories like evolution, right? It was a much different process. For them, it was like exploring God's creation. That's how they studied science. For them, it was unlocking the secrets of God's creation, of the universe, right?
So, is there any other things you have to believe to accept the Islamic worldview?
So yeah, you have to first accept the five senses, and then you have to accept the intellect. Once your intellect establishes that God exists, and you lead yourself to Islam, right? Then you would automatically accept Wahi, all revelation, and revelation includes everything.
So there's a lot of other people who believe in divine revelation. What I'm trying to say is that is there any specifics or any differences in the worldview, in the Islamic worldview? Like, because you're making it seem like there's this Islamic worldview um, is something that, like, if you believe in Wahi, that means you believe in the Islamic worldview, right? You're making it seem like it's that simple. What I'm
No, it's
trying
not
to
that
say
simple.
is
Yeah.
that, like, we can understand Wahi in multiple ways, and we can have different worldviews, even though we're Muslim or.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm trying to ask you, like, what are some of the specifics about the worldview that you're presenting in terms of understanding Wahi in that way? Like, are there any specifics that you can tell us about?
I mean, there's obviously one correct one, right?
You keep saying that, but لا يملك الحق إلا الله, right? So there's many paths to God, and so our job is to try to find that path.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm specifically asking about the worldview that you're presenting to us today. What are some of the basic understandings of it or principles of that worldview, other than just five senses, intellect, wahi? What are some of the basic principles of that worldview?
So again, that's a separate discussion. So that goes into, usul ad-din, tawheed, adala, nabuwa, imam,
Is that
qiyamah.
what worldview is?
That shapes your
That's
worldview.
aqidah.
Yeah, that so
From what I understand,
yeah.
aqidah and worldview
So
are
all of
different
these
things.
will shape how you believe.
I'm trying to say, aren't those two different things, aqidah and worldview?
No, so aqidah comes after worldview. Once you have a worldview,
Okay,
then that's how you interpret beliefs,
exactly.
and that's what leads you.
That's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say. So what is entailed in that worldview? Before we get to aqidah, what is that worldview?
I mean, it's really just the Quran and Ahlul Bayt. I mean, how if they're interpreted correctly, right? That is the worldview you would want to follow. Everyone has different worldviews, right? First of all, but what we want is the truly Islamic worldview.
Okay, what does that mean exactly? So I'm trying to get
So
to,
it's
like,
full submission to Allah, right? Full submission.
okay,
That's one of the
that you
key
should submit
ones.
your will to God.
Exactly.
That's one of the principles of the worldview that you think is the Islamic worldview.
Yeah.
Right?
That is the Islamic worldview. Submitting yourself to God completely, and then applying Islam to society. So it's not just kept in the homes; it's applied everywhere.
What do you mean applied?
So Islam, right? Well, he encompasses everything.
That's not Hafidin, brother. What do you mean?
No, not like that. I'm saying like when the Prophet established his nation, right? There was a set principles of economics.
Actually, we're gonna talk about that later. I'm gonna talk
Yeah.
about that.
So there were set principles of economics, right? There were set social
I don't
principles.
know if they talked about it in that way. There weren't set social principles of economics. The term economics wasn't really.
I mean, there was a way the Prophet
It was
administered.
just a different paradigm. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there was Sharia. Let's just talk about Sharia.
We're gonna talk. That's exactly
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
So the Prophet implemented that into society, right? Because Wahi encompasses all of that. So this is just the basics, really.
Yeah.
These tools of knowledge will lead you to forming a worldview, right? And we can conclude from our last discussion that if a person was to reject a particular tool, right, he would not be able to gain the knowledge that relies on that tool, and debating them directly on the topic will have no results. So you see this a lot with Christians, at least. whenever sometimes, people debate them, they end up saying, well, but God says in the Bible. But how do you argue that when the person doesn't even believe in the Bible, right? So again, you have to work from the ground up, right? If you're arguing with a person that doesn't accept wahi, you can't bring wahi into that conversation. You have to begin with the five senses, lead them to the aql, lead them to the wahi. That's the first point. Second point is the five senses are not a standard for all truths. It is not the only reliable tool to acquire knowledge of the reality, and it cannot prove or disprove anything beyond its domain, right? So we talked about God's existence, right? That cannot be proved just by the five senses, right? Materialistically, we don't know if God exists or not. For that, you'll have to use your intellect to establish if God exists or not. It is also yeah, so they're not a standard, obviously, because the five senses are subjective to everyone. How they perceive, the world through those senses is very subjective, and how they interpret them. Second point is sometimes revelation tells us something, but it does not tell us the reason for it, but we can trust it because revelation as an intellectually proven tool for acquiring knowledge. So again, once you accept God exists, right, you will accept revelation if you find true revelation. And you may not understand all of Revelation, right? But at least you can trust it. You know it's a trustable source because it's God's word. Sometimes the intellect can't prove or explain a matter, but it proves that Revelation can and does prove the matter. Therefore, it has indirectly but surely proven the matter. Do we understand this, or should I go into it? All right. And then what's next? Okay, so today's topic was mostly proving God, right? So we've accepted the five senses. Now let's use our intellect to prove God's existence from a purely intellectual perspective. So we're not going to bring revelation into this, just from a human mind perspective. So for God, there's two arguments. There's dalil and burhan. Can you find a better mic? Yeah. There's dalil and burhan. So these are the two arguments. Dalil is proof, first of all, from Arabic, right? Dalil means proof. It's easy to understand. It has tangible concepts and premises that are understood. And it cannot hold against heavy doubts. Burhan is reasoning, and it's difficult to understand. It is technical, it has abstract concepts, and it's a very strong argument. So instead of Dalil, we're going to use Burhan to prove that God exists. So the argument of necessary and possible existence. This is a famous argument.
Contingent. Instead of possible, contingent.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the argument. So first of all, this specific argument, is a completely logical argument and doesn't need information from another tool. So it doesn't need revelation, it doesn't need the five senses. It's a very strong and firm argument, and many questions are solved through this argument. It needs more thinking though, and it will eventually prove God. So the argument uses abstract concepts. So again, this is Burhan, okay? It uses reasoning. Abstract means it doesn't have shape, color, time, or space. It doesn't have any properties of the material world. This makes it challenging for us to comprehend a concept. Therefore, we must familiarize with the concepts that we will be using. These concepts show us reality, the power of the human intellect. So, all of existence, right, it can be divided into three sections. First of all, there's necessary existence. there's possible or contingent, and then there's impossible existence. So in Arabic, again, this is wajib al-wujud, this is mumkin al-wujud, this is mumtani al-wujud. So for this necessary existence, it has to exist. It is necessary for it to exist, and it cannot not exist.
Like, what do you mean?
We're gonna get into it, don't worry. Possible or contingent existence, it's possible for it to exist or not to exist. Impossible is that it's impossible for it to exist. And there's no other possibility for existence. These are the three divisions of existence. I'm going to go into each one. So one example, for example, right? The sweetness of chai, right? The sweetness of tea. Actually, I'm going to go into this afterwards. This is a little bit earlier. So let me just explain in simple terms. Sugar cannot be sweet and bitter at the same time, right? Sugar has to be sweet. Is that a what's it called? Is that an accepted truth?
Yes.
Yeah. So that would be necessary, right? The opposite of it is logically impossible, and it leads to a contradiction. Sugar is either sweet or bitter, not sweet. Okay, chai can be sweet or not sweet, right? Tea itself, it can either be sweet or not sweet, right? There's two possibilities. So this comes in under contingent, right? It neither leads to a contradiction, nor does its opposite lead to a contradiction, right? We can all accept that from a necessary perspective, sugar can't be sweet and bitter at the same time, so it can only be sweet. Tea itself, right? It can either be sweet or not sweet. Okay. Now something completely impossible. A triangle with four sides, right? That concept is impossible to perceive, right? Every single triangle has three sides, otherwise it's not a triangle. So that goes under impossible existence, right? It's logically impossible and it leads to a contradiction. Another example of an impossible existence is you being your own son and father at the same time, right? That can't be possible at all. So possible existence, right? Contingent. It doesn't exist by essence. Therefore, existence needs to be given to it for it to exist. It requires a cause to come into existence. Therefore, it continuously needs to be provided with existence. It is dependent on its cause to exist. So tea will only be sweet as long as it has sugar. If sugar is removed from it, it will no longer be sweet, right? The sugar is constantly providing sweetness to that chai, right? If it doesn't for even a second, it's not, sweet chai anymore. It's the opposite. So again, chai will only be sweet as long as it has sugar. That's the possible existence here. Other examples. We can think about these things. Just because we can think about them doesn't mean they exist. Strawberry shortcake, we can think of it, right? But it doesn't mean it exists right now, right? You can think of gold, right? A mountain of gold, right? But doesn't mean it exists right now. It can either exist or never exist, you never know. But you can perceive it, that's the important thing. And finally, impossible existence, it can never exist. Again, we talked about this. We can only think about it, but it doesn't have any reality in the outside world. So a person who is both a father and a son relative to the same person, a cat that is fully both black as well as white at the same time. These are impossible concepts, right? They fall under this. And finally, necessary existence. So it exists by essence. Therefore, existence doesn't need to be given for it to exist. It doesn't require a cause to come into existence. It always existed and will always exist. It does not depend on any other being to exist. It is independent. So that's the thing. This is independent. These two are dependent. So we can think of such a being, but does such a being really exist in the outside world? Let's think. So an ant, right? We can think of it and it exists. A dinosaur. We can think of it, but we've never seen it, but we know it exists. A natural wooden table which is 100% plastic. Impossible, right? A man as big as the size of the earth. We can perceive it, right, in our mind, but it isn't possible. A God which is both 1 and 3 at the same time. Again, we can try to perceive that, right? But again, it's kind of impossible. A non-material metaphysical being with an infinite amount of knowledge. We can't comprehend that fully, right? But we can accept that it exists. It's a possibility, right? A person who created himself, that's kind of impossible, right? And a pink unicorn, we can think of it. It's a possible existence. You know, we can conceptually think of it, but it doesn't mean it has to exist. So it's a possible contingent existence. All right. Proving that a necessary existent exists. If proven, we are also proving that it doesn't require a cause to come into existence. So again, every effect has a cause. It's not the other way around, right? Every effect ultimately has a cause. So it always existed and will always exist. It does not depend on any other being to exist, therefore it's independent, right? So this is the one thing that is independent. All right, and this by essence is truth. So I exist, step one, I exist. If someone denies their own existence, right, punch them, right? We exist, that's the truth we all can accept, right? We exist currently. All right, step two, I am a possible existence. I can either not exist or I can exist, right? At one point, I know I did not exist. And at one point, I know I will not exist in the future. This goes for past as well. There was a cause that brought me into existence. So we can conclude that there must be a cause that exists, right? I am the effect of a cause. I can accept that, right? That's a universal truth. So my cause, right? My cause is necessary, right? The argument is proven. If my cause is possible, what is the cause of this possible existence, right? If my existence, right, is possible, what is the cause of this possible existence? And if my existence doesn't exist, then it's an impossible existence. So there's two cause chains. I'm going to draw them out here. So a potential existence, right, it either has a necessary, right, a necessary cause, or the possibilities are two, right? There was an initiation which led to the possible existence. There was a first initiator, right, that led to the effect of existence, all right? Or the second argument is that there was an infinite chain that led to my existence. For example, I can either exist that God has always existed and I'm the effect of that cause. He is the cause, right? No one created him, right? He is the ultimate initiator and I am the product of his creation. Or I can accept that there is a continuous chain of possibilities, right? I came from my mom, I came from my parents, they came from someone, they came from someone, right? Then if God is in the equation, then someone created God, someone who created him, who created him, who created him, right? It's a continuous chain of possibilities. This logically isn't possible, right? So you would eventually lead to this one. There was an initiative cause, right, that led to existences. Or I can just accept this one, right? Logically, an infinite chain of dependent existences is impossible. An infinite chain of dependent existences is impossible. So conclusion, a necessary existence does exist, right? Some of its traits, which we already discussed, is that it's independent and causeless. It is eternal. It is the initial cause of everything. All of existence is reliant upon this necessary existence.
So the infinite regression, can't we just say that, like, we've been here infinite, like?
So yeah, that's a good question. According to my notes, it's logically impossible. So if something keeps on going, right? Who created that God? Who created that God? Who created that God, right? Then you don't really get to the truth of the answer, right? It'll just keep on going. You'll just keep asking, the same question, if there is really an infinite chain. But it doesn't make sense, right? If God is God, right, how can he be created? If he is the creator, right, how can he be created? It doesn't make sense.
I still think that it it still materializes God in some way. I feel like when we do the infinite regression, I think that's the problem Islamically, is that it would have to mean that existence is a part of God, and
Yeah.
that's the impossibility.
Ahsan.
That's one of the reasons that they don't accept it, is that um, you would have to equate the two. You would be giving creation an attribute of God.
Yeah, so at that point you'd make the necessary a part of the possible existence, right? You'd turn God into.
This is what it comes down to when it comes to this, is by definition. How are you defining that subject?
Mhm.
So when we're talking about the creation, we're defining it in a very specific way where it does not. It has a creator,
Mhm.
and so by definition, creation has a creator. That means it has to start.
It has to start.
Okay?
Yeah.
So if we say that creation doesn't need a creator, we're saying that it could be infinite. Well, we're giving it the definition we're giving creation is changing,
Mhm.
right? Based off of the infinite regression, we're giving it a attribute in its definition that isn't becoming or doesn't really belong to it.
Ahsan. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. So in Surah At-Tur, verse 35, Allah says, "Were they created from other than a creator, or are they the creators?" Allah poses this question to us. So they, the potential existence, they were either created without a cause, which is not possible, because the only thing that can come into existence in any because anything can come into existence in any circumstance, right? The potential existence were created, they are their own cause, so that's not possible, right? We didn't create ourselves, that's not a possibility. Other potential creation, so the potential existence was created. Other creation of human being is the cause of their creation. So this is not possible because this would result in a cycle. The universe is an effect of a cause, and that cause is the effect of another cause. So again, infinite chain of events. This is again not possible because this will result in an indefinite chain. So by wajib al-wujud, necessary existence, whose existence is from its essence, that's the only possibility. Allah exists and is the wajib al-wujud. So this will only apply to God. God exists and therefore there is creation, right? He is the initial cause. If you don't accept that, then you accept that there's an infinite chain of events. So what else can we deduce about the necessary existence? So the necessary existence is not made of parts. It's composite. It's murakkab, right? Sorry. The necessary existence is not made of parts. Composite means made of parts, and simple, basit, right? It means not made of parts. It cannot be divided. So anything that is made of part depends on its parts to exist. So basically, God is indefinite, right? There's no parts of God. But us, we have different parts, right? Because we are the existence. We are made of parts. God cannot be divided. We can be divided. So physical beings are made of parts. The necessary existence is not made of parts. So therefore, this is immaterial. God cannot be physical, right? God cannot come materialistically into existence, into a human form or any form, right? We have to accept God is infinite.
You mean he cannot, or like
So God cannot be materialized. God is beyond the material realm. That's what I'm saying here, right?
Remember, we're defining material as creation, and creation has to have a creator.
Yeah, because if God were to be something material, then it would be made of parts. But we've already established God isn't made of parts. And the five senses cannot detect the necessary existence. So necessary existence is absolute perfect. There's no deficiency in this existence. So this existence is in this portion of existence. Okay. So the missing perfection in relation to the necessary existence will be a possible existence. This will result in the necessary existence being partly necessary and partly potential. One thing cannot be both, necessary and potential at the same time, or the necessary to have missing perfection. It will need a cause. Then the necessary will no longer be the necessary. Let me explain this in simpler terms. So this is existence, right? It is ultimate perfection. So if we're saying this is the necessary, if there was a deficiency in perfection, right, this will result in the necessary being a possible existence. It needs to be perfect, right? So multiplicity is differences. So if there are two necessary existences, they have to be different. That means they each have to have something the other one does not have. That means they are both deficient in something. Do we see how that's going, right? If there's two gods, then that means one of them is deficient in something while the other is deficient in something else. But we have proven that the necessary existence is perfect. Hence, there cannot be more than one necessary existence. So necessary existence is the one and only being that is independent, infinite, and absolutely perfect. Allah is a being that is independent, right? He's infinite and absolutely perfect, and we believe He is only one. And therefore, the necessary existence is God. So, any questions, and I will do my best to answer. Because, again, I'm not very well versed, but I presented to you what I was taught. Jazakallah. Any questions, any arguments we can pick apart together? No?
I have one if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have textual reasons, for example, refuting the idea that Isa alayhi salam was God incarnate. The Quran says otherwise. But is there an intellectual argument against someone who says if God wanted to take a human form, He could?
Yeah, that's
How,
what I was.
how would we logically refute that?
No. So these are all based off of definition, and so definitionally, it's not allowed.
But what about this says that can't happen?
So the necessary, right, it has to be complete. It isn't made of parts, right? If you materialize this, right, then that means it's made of parts.
So according to this model, the necessary existence couldn't manifest in the form of a human.
No.
He couldn't do that.
No. But it can create something that manifests itself.
But it can't become a creation.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a contradiction.
But couldn't his original essence stay the same while
It's a
still
contradiction.
being a human form?
It's by definition contradiction.
Because then
It's not because you're separating. God.
Then he's reliant, right?
You're separating. No, please. You're separating. You said his essence still be there and him body on the. You're creating a separation there, and so there you're doing a multiplicity. That's not by God is by definition inseparable. They're not made of parts.
Okay.
Do we get that? Yeah. So again, 3 in 1, that's already impossible to conceptualize, right?
You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Is that you can't. A single can't have. Can't be broken up.
It's much easier to accept that God exists immaterially and He created material existence that reflects Himself.
Well, when they say it's 3, they don't say it's broken up. They say 3 in 1.
3 in 1, yeah.
But that's not, is that broken up?
Yeah.
They say 1 is 3 and 3 is 1. So they have both aspects of it.
Is that broken up?
Yeah, you're giving it parts. You're saying this one thing has 3 aspects, but we're saying that a one.
I'm confused about it. I've heard people say it's 1, and it's not, it's 3 in 1.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's a contradiction. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, they make sense of it.
No.
I don't make sense of it.
A part of that requires blind faith.
You assume that they make sense.
No,
In their mind, they've accepted.
They
it.
said it makes sense, so I have to
Take them for their word.
I have to accept it.
That to them, it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think even to them, it doesn't make sense because
Deep down, yeah,
no,
it doesn't.
Because it is a mystery. No, they call it the mystery.
Oh, yeah, my dad went to
Called a mystery.
Catholic school in New York. long
This
time.
is one of the mysteries.
And they said you just have to accept it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So see, that requires blind faith.
In Islam, there is no mystery.
Not really.
No.
Straightforward.
But 3 and
Especially
1.
with the Sharia, because we have justice. Adala is one of our usul al-din. So God can't act like God has made it incumbent on Himself not to act in these ways,
Mm-hmm.
so we can come to know Him in a very easy, straightforward. There can't be a mystery. There can't. It just like why is God just messing with us? Like a mystery? Like I gotta solve this puzzle? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking to Christian Alonso. Yeah, they say it makes sense. They say it's one. It's not. It's not broken up.
The Islamic world has like accepted that it makes sense to them, and like okay, that's why we still believe that they're monotheists. We still have we don't call them polytheists.
Yeah, because there you go.
Because
So
they, at the end of the day, deep down, they are monotheists, but the way it comes out is a little weird
well,
to us.
now that's the other question is how are they monotheistic?
Because Jews will straight up say no, they're not monotheists.
Yeah, so why do we say that?
Because we give them the benefit of the doubt.
But if they're saying God had a son, that's not monotheism.
We give them the benefit of the doubt.
But how do you give someone benefit of the doubt when they clearly say God has
No,
a
but
son?
they're also saying that it's monotheist. They say both. They might be contradicting themselves, but they do believe in a single God.
But even the Quran will say, don't say God had a son.
Yeah, you can't say that.
But they say.
Well, it's not us.
But then clearly they
Brother
need to
Sean.
say they're not from
No, they're
If someone
monotheists.
says God has a son,
No, I think the question is about monotheism.
Some Muslims who do call them polytheists.
I mean,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They probably are.
That opinion
Well,
probably-
actually,
if a Christian comes to me and says God has a son, I would have to say that's not monotheism.
well, again, we give them the benefit of the doubt.
I think what he's trying to say is that
Yeah, we
what
give.
he's trying to say is we give them the benefit of the doubt that they are at least trying to be monotheists.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, that's what I say too.
yeah,
They say it makes sense to them, but it doesn't make sense.
yeah. But to each his own.
3 and 1.
And the Ahlul Kitab people of the book, right? They
Yeah.
still believe in the Bible.
I want to talk to someone about Ahlul Kitab because we expanded that to include Zoroastrians. And I wonder how far we're allowed
he
to
said that
expand.
today.
Yeah,
I got kind of confused.
yeah. That's a little bit of the Persian influence, but like we'll see. I don't know.
You can ask them about it.
Yeah.
It is accepted by law.
Yeah. Most Muslims, even Ahlul Kitab.
I mean, I got confused. I don't have the answer.
So the idea is with Ahlul Kitab is that God sent them a book, and we do believe that over 200,000 prophets have existed. So I feel like in some way we should assume everybody's Ahlul Kitab, but I don't know. That's something for we'll get to who we should ask in regards to this.
But like,
Yeah,
only some have they've been noted in the Quran.
yeah. Only the Jews and the Christians. That's what I mean. It was led to.
The Zabur.
Yeah, those are the people of the Kitab. That Kitab of Dawood is the Zabur.
Yeah.
So these are specific books Allah passed sent down. Yes.
This may sound kind of weird, but I've actually tried to understand the concept of 3 and 1.
Yeah.
Actually,
You can't.
Like, I wanted to see if I could grasp it,
Mhm.
like as a religious.
No.
No, Muslim. I said, okay, let me
Put yourself in that person's
let me
shoes.
see if I could really try to, and I couldn't. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's weird, but I said, let me try to see if it's true.
And if
Mhm.
you think of it like if you take one of them out, to them that means that then it's not God anymore then. Because if you take one out, then it's like two. So 2 and 1, like it's not their God anymore.
Like, I'm not against.
You're picking the God.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really wanted to see if, hey, could that be true? Let me try to figure it out. And there's no way. It's so impossible. 3 and 1.
I went to a Christian school as well. They don't, when you're a kid, they just sort of tell you.
Yeah,
They just say the Trinity.
But the more you think about it, you're like, what is this?
And there's no explanation. They never show you, oh, it's in the Bible. They say it's in the Bible, but they never show you where.
It's because I don't think it's there.
They just tell you you have to. It's not there. They just tell you have to believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Trinity is a principle that was developed. I believe it's not like something.
There's no Trinity in the Bible.
Yeah. So that's actually something we're gonna get to. So the past, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I would like to start by reading Surah Al-Fatiha for all the, all our loved ones who have passed away, and all the people in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Burma, Sudan, Libya, you know, all the people, all the oppressed people around the world. Let's read a quick Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. So the topic I've been going through the past few sessions has been immigration. I've been trying to get us to, we were discussing like what are prudent immigration policies, how should a nation restrict the people who enter, on what basis should we let people enter. We then talked about a little bit of the Islamic idea of borders and citizenship. Just a quick recap, so everybody can like get back to what we were talking about. I kind of just want to talk about the idea of citizenship real quick. Citizenship, right? And like a nation, a country, a state, countries, whatever. What do these all mean, right? And that'll give us a recap by talking about these concepts, because what is immigration, right? What is immigration?
Going to like a foreign land to
Immigrate.
Immigrate. Like, what does it mean to immigrate?
Just move to
Just to move. It just means to move from one land to another land. And you know, right now we have borders, right? So when you go from one piece of land to another piece of land, you might be crossing a fence, right? So that one of the ideas that I brought up was that in the Supreme Court cases, there's a foundational principle that a nation is not a nation without borders, because it needs to be defined, right? So if you're defining borders, that is required, and then you actually then have to define who is a citizen, who is a member of this nation, right? And then a process to become a member, right? So we can restrict it, like, oh, citizenship is restricted by, you know, blood. So most of the Arab world, it's strictly patrilineal. You know, I would love a Saudi or Emirati citizenship, but that is impossible. It is strictly patrilineal blood, and they have very strict laws against immigration. They have a lot of temporary worker permits, residencies, but getting citizenship is extremely hard. Whereas in the West, there's this legal concept of just soili. So this is a Latin term for a citizenship of the soil. So wherever you're born, the land on which you're born on, you get that citizenship, and that's where this birthright citizenship comes from. That just by the mere fact of being born on this land, you get a right to live on that land, right? No, you just, so again, remember when we talked about nation? We created borders. Immigration, going from one piece of land to another. So there's, you know, legal concepts about how do we become citizens, right? So is it strictly by blood? We're restricting this piece of land to blood, or are we restricting this piece of land to whoever's born on that property, or born on that land? And so that's the other form of citizenship is birth. And then there's usually countries have a form of naturalization. Naturalization is how you become a citizen. If you weren't born or get it at birth, you can become naturalized in various ways. So that's immigration, right? One of the things I always like to do is, like, whenever we talk about legal concepts, I like to take it a step further in terms of understanding concepts intellectually, philosophically. So one of the things that is very important about all of this is that it's established law. Law is what governs all of this. It dictates what what a nation is. It dictates what a citizen is. For all of these ideas, the law is what defines it. So, and then tell me what the Sharia is. So we have Islamic terms of fiqh, Sharia, Qanun, so like different ways to express this concept, but they are distinct. And so, can you guys tell me like what do you guys think Sharia is?
When I hear the word Sharia,
Yeah.
it's like religion pops in like right away. So like
Okay.
religious laws, like laws based on religion.
Okay, religious law. Okay. Anything else?
It's God's law,
Okay, God's law.
and fiqh is our understanding of that law.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. That's the connection. And so Sharia, like Deen, so there's a very famous verse in the Quran, Deen indallah al-Islam, right? Deen is like a concept of submission that God has had as a principle for all humankind, an underlying principle, but this can be expressed in different ways depending on the time, right? So we understand that the deen Allah has sent to every prophet has been Islam. It's this underlying concept of submitting yourself to the Sharia, honestly. And so we got to further understand what the Sharia is, because there's a lot of people who are scared of this term, that it kind of has a taboo feel, and it's we sometimes just quickly define it as Islamic law, religious law, but I think it might be a little deeper than that. So I think you mentioned that this is God's law and fiqh. So what do you guys think of when you think of God's law? What is it composed? Where do we get God's law from first? Yeah, okay, source. So sources. So we have sources. So when you were mentioning, we have sources of knowledge. So epistemology is the philosophical study of knowledge. And so us as Muslims, we actually have very specific set sources. We have, which are the three that you mentioned. So we have our senses. Remember I told you guys this is a posteriori. I don't know if you guys remember this. And then we have intellect,
Oh yes.
which is the a priori. And then we have revelation. Revelation. So those are our sources. Anything else about the Sharia we should know? Anybody have any like observations about it? Any?
Like what we perceive from like the news and stuff, Sharia is like it's kind of seen as like a really strict kind of like
And do you know, strictly enforced, right?
strictly enforced.
So one of the things I kind of mentioned it when you said something about it has to be in society, right? There's this idea of enforcement.
So yeah, that's the question. Like, how do we enforce Sharia?
No, that's the idea again. La ikraha fi din. So that is the whole idea about Islam and the Sharia, that there is no enforcement. The enforcement is on yourself. It's a moral tradition that is self. So especially in Islam, like if we just some of the legal requirements in the Quran. So like that would allow for others to enforce a punishment on you, right? So let's take some of the big ones. Like if you're the ones that might cause death is like zina or adultery. When they have like some of the more extreme, you have to, and it's the theft even. You can't be poor or needy to be punished for it, right? You have to have four witnesses physical witnesses of the act for there to be punishment in these profane, in the profane sexual acts. You know, even in like simple like contract law, like there's a whole page in the Quran just talking about how to do a contract and how to do inheritance. These things again, they're moral and self-enforced, and it goes back again to one of the reasons I was pushing you about worldview is that a worldview is extremely comprehensive. It has a lot of ideas that come from it, right? So we all have a worldview. We might not be aware of all the nuances of our worldview. One of the good things is to question your motivations and question your beliefs. This will help you understand your personal worldview better to then develop it in a way that you would like. And so the worldview, like you mentioned, is overlapping and influences all this. And so when we think of the Sharia, when we think of the Deen, we're thinking of like these concepts that it's more of like something we want to attain more than something like, yeah, exactly, something we already have. We have like sources that can help us there, and we're always going to differ on all of these sources, but the idea is that we're working to get there. And trying to make this a more current events way is that always in every society, the people who are recognized to be the best in that society are the ones who follow that culture's or society's laws, right? When we look at just Islamic tradition or Islamic cultures, the people who have the image, it doesn't even need to go past image. People who have the image of religiosity are respected. They are, if you see a man with a beard and a amama, you respect him, right? He's automatically understood to be at the upper echelons of society. If you see a Jewish man who wears a yarmulke or he keeps his threads, he's keeping the law of his religion. You respect that. When you see a nun, you're like, oh man, she just dedicated her life for her religion. They're following a certain moral code that they've enforced on themselves, and that is respected across all people, and it's easy to recognize. And one of the things that we should do as Muslims is take the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt and internalize them in a way to express Islam for people to see that we are the best, right? So one of the things that the Imams would say is that don't call us through words, let your actions bring people to Ahlul Bayt, right? That your akhlaq, your actions, right? So the way people perceive you, the way people see you, that is the biggest important thing about being in a culture and a society, and especially us as Muslims in the United States. We should hold ourselves accountable even more to not only follow this nation's laws, but also the moral code and the Sharia that God has given us to follow. And that would allow us to, show our best selves, right? Adfa billati hiya ahsan. Always go forward with what is good or what is best. And so a lot of people currently are worried about being immigrants, by living in the United States, by having a different skin color. Like there's a lot of fear or worry. But what I could say about all people who immigrated to the United States, we actually fled places that would oppress us for our religion. And in the United States, thank God, alhamdulillah, we have enshrined rights that are central to this country that protect freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right? There are, and so we should take advantage of that by practicing our religion the best way and expressing our best selves.
We have no excuse.
Yeah, you have no excuse. You really don't. You really don't. Like, it's the United States is the best place for you to have free thinking ideas, right? Because you're not gonna you always will find a community that you can go around. You won't be exiled. You can, you know, it's freedom of thought. And so you have this liberty to go about and act in a very specific way. And what I want to get to now is that as long as we're following the laws, there's nothing to be afraid of, right? And even when it comes to Islam, like what did we say that faith means? Iman. What's the opposite of Iman? You're here.
So,
Remember Iman.
Iman, it was kufr.
Originally, remember it's about fear. So the opposite of Iman is
Kufr, to hide.
to hide, right? Because you don't feel safe. Iman comes from amana, so it comes from safety. So you are always safe in your beliefs and if you're following God, right? So it works both ways, right? If you follow the moral code that God has given you, you're safe in your faith with Him. And if you follow the country's laws, you're safe because those laws are upheld in this country and you got nothing to worry about. So, you know, what's important actually at this point, what you are responsible to do is gain the knowledge, right? And then act accordingly, right? Get the knowledge about what God wants us and how He wants us to act. And again, know how you're supposed to act in a society, in a culture. Like don't break the law. Know your rights, right? Like, that's one of the things that I would always encourage people. Not only know what the government and society expects of you, but also what you expect of them, right? That's another great thing about the United States. We have a social contract that allows for us to have rights that are protected, natural rights that are protected against the government's intrusion. And so that's knowing your rights. But you should also know the law in terms of how am I supposed to act accordingly to these laws. And again, all this is deeply enshrined in how we have a relationship with God. Because what you do one thing is how you do everything. So if you're, you know, honestly, if you're committing fraud with the government, you probably aren't the best Muslim, right? Like you can't be deceptive and break laws that you know that you're doing something wrong and then try to say that you're breaking laws. Just the way that you don't break God's laws, you don't break this country's laws.
God says that too.
You know, it's really straightforward. And so what I would encourage us all to do again is to know your rights, know the law, and act accordingly, right? And again with the Sharia, know what God expects of you and act accordingly. And you know what's even cooler with Islam though is that we have we have different, so Allah is very near to us, right? But He is near to us, but we can be far away from Him, right? And God gives us a very specific methodology to get close to Him. It's very clear. Like there's no mystery involved. You follow the Sharia and you will get close to God. You follow this path, right? You follow the Sirat al-Mustaqim, you follow the Sharia, you will get close to God. And that is the goal, is to get closer and nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah. You guys have any questions, concerns, thoughts?
So the definitions you gave for like nation,
Mm-hmm.
like when it comes to the EU, it's like a very different situation.
Yeah, so the European Union, so again, it's going to come down to law and how you define yourself and how you govern yourself. So they've defined the Europe. So again, even the United States is actually individual states in the United States are closer to the countries in the European Union. So in the United States, we have a very interesting federalist system where each state has a lot of power. In the federal government, even though it's huge at the moment, was historically much smaller and had very specific roles. And it's gotten much larger now. It's probably going to get much smaller. Pendulum swings. But yeah, the EU does define it differently. So you can have a confederacy of nations. So these are nations that have decided to have certain types of agreements with each other. And what that entails is that maybe free movement of people. So again, this is all enshrined in law and how you define it. One of the interesting things that like one of the interesting things is citizenship, in terms of what makes you a part of that nation, right? So even in the European Union, they don't give everybody a European Union passport, right? You have separate passports, but these nations have agreements with each other. You can, you're still French, you're still Italian, you're still separate. But one of the things I would like to, I guess, bring up again for Islam, what is citizenship in Islam?
Islam is much more communal in that sense, where like the earth belongs to God's servant.
How are you become a citizen of Islam? There you go. So citizenship is that's your naturalization process. We all have a fitrah. We're all born Muslim. We're all born Muslim, but we might leave it. But yeah, there's a naturalization process of shahada. So that's all that's required. So does it have? So how is the Muslim nation? I don't like defined. Does it have a border?
Not necessarily.
No, because what the nation. So what legal definitions are we using for Islam? How do we derive it?
Universal.
Yeah, so we get it from the Sharia, right? And we said that the Sharia is like a moral self code. So the borders, there's no border because there's no border for God, right? You can follow the morals of God anywhere. Well, actually, you're encouraged to leave a place if you can't practice your religion. So that's why we have hijrah, right? You're supposed to live wherever you can practice your morals the best way. So that's where God's nation is. It's wherever you can practice your religion freely. And so that's why the Muslims weren't able to practice in Mecca. They had to leave to Abyssinia, right? To Habasha, to Ethiopia, and then to Medina. Again, I think there's a jurisprudential legal dispute over when a Muslim is actually allowed to actually migrate. When are you supposed to leave the land you were born on, right? On what basis should you travel and go do things? And there's usually very limited situations, but one of the reasons why you should leave is if you can't practice your religion. If you can't practice your religion freely, then you should leave. Yeah.
So you mentioned like in the beginning that some people leave their land because of like
Immigration,
restrictions.
yes.
Like restrictions. Like they can't do something. They're being
Persecuted, yeah.
So wouldn't they? I feel like they're different from being a citizen. They're more like refugees.
So yeah, so asylum. There's a naturalization process. So refugees are an interesting. I guess we can talk about refugees for a moment because they are a hot topic. What is a refugee? What is? Yeah, but on what basis, right? So these are actually international treaties, and there's I believe we'll count them out. There's very specific ways you can ask for political asylum. So you ask for asylum, refugee status. So it's based off of political opinion, race. So it's if you're persecution based on. So if you're persecuted based on the basis of your political opinion, your race, your religion, national origin, political race, gender. Is gender on that? Let me check my work. So torture, if you've been tortured, torture convention. Torture, what are they? So actually last time it was a cool activity. I brought in a citizenship application. Maybe next time I'll bring in an asylum application for you guys to look at. Yeah, there's so many applications. So race, religion, nationality, political opinion. So yeah, it's not gender. It's membership in a social group. That's the one I got. Membership So it's not gender. So membership in a particular social group. It's a very vague social group. So you can use this one to mean a lot of different things. So you can use this one to be like, yeah, I'm a woman. I'm a part of a specific social group. And you have to make a strong legal connection when you're making the asylum argument. But these are the basis for seeking political refuge, asylum. And this is treaty based. So I believe most countries, most Western countries, I would say, that's why everybody runs there. If you go there and say that I'm being persecuted in my home country for any of these reasons, they would accept you, right? What do you think Islam's position on this would be?
And Islamically, you'd be granted refuge anyway. Like,
No, we just talked about it. On what basis should you run or leave? So a lot of these people are So one of the big things that I would say is that most of the people who come are economic migrants, right? So they're seeking a better economic life. So they might be poor and destitute, and that sucks. But you're risking your life for anyway. Most people are economic refugees, but that isn't a protected class, right? That you can't get you can't get asylum because you're poor, right? Or you come from a poor country. You have to be persecuted for one of these reasons. And I would say the religion, again, we said the religion is one of the main reasons to flee. If you're being persecuted, run, I guess. But these are the protected classes. So political opinion, race, religion.
Islamically, is it justified to leave a Muslim country to go to a non-Muslim country?
So it's not what's a Muslim country?
Yeah, so let's start from there. What defines a Muslim country?
Yeah, so we were talking about earlier. A Muslim country would be a country.
One with, you know,
No, not one that just says Dastur in al-Quran. That's not how it works. You don't just say our constitution is the Quran and then you're a Muslim country. No. Remember, the Sharia is moral. So, and it's not enforced.
I'm a little confused about the not enforced.
Not enforced. You're not forced to go pray.
I'm not talking about prayer.
Yeah.
About because that could be complicated, but
The Sharia is not.
like
The
weird
fiqh,
stuff like
wait. Sharia is not, but the fiqh is. So you do have social contract to follow a certain law that has been understood.
like abortion. They could implement that, like no abortion. Like Islamic country.
I would even think like that. No, I don't think. I think an Islamic country
That
would.
would be under the Ten Commandments, murder.
I think abortion is a sensitive issue because there are instances where, I think most. So this would be. So in the Shia tradition, there's this risala. Risala is like a legal code of how a scholar of Sharia has given us a whole legal code. This is the fiqh. We have tried to understand the Sharia. This is our legal code. This is our risala. And so, and even amongst Islamic Sharia jurisprudence, like intellectuals of this, there's dispute about abortion. So when can you do an abortion? If you're going to put the mother's life at risk, that's the most popular.
Nobody agrees with that.
But I'm just saying, like, there might,
Just saying,
even in every law, there's ways, there are intellectual
like basic
like
abortion here.
discussions about it.
Freely to get an abortion.
We're in the South, man. I don't think so.
Yeah, after up until a certain time. Yeah.
No, like not anymore. We can't, like, abortions are very restricted in Florida now.
No, for no reason. You have to do it within a certain time.
Yeah, it's restricted by time.
Yeah, for no reason.
Oh yeah. I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
I think
You
it
have to
should-
have a reason.
I think it should be forced to say you can't get one for no reason.
Yeah. I get what you're saying.
I think that I'm a little confused about that now.
No, it's not enforced because you, even in the. So what do we mean by enforced?
Like,
You
I'm
mean
gonna make you. I'm gonna make
No, force, threat of violence,
you. Yeah, I'm gonna stop.
violence. No, there is no violence to stop things in Islam.
or I'm gonna put a ticket.
No, there's nothing like that.
Like, well, then how do you stop? How do you stop?
You can't stop it. If it's done and there's proof it happened, then you're punished for it. I think it's different.
Yeah.
Well, like,
So are you saying you can
so what's
punish
the plan?
someone? You can punish someone if they did it, but you can't forcefully prevent people from doing
Yeah,
it.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much.
That seems a little weird.
No, you can't. Even our laws here, you can't stop someone like you remember Minority Report? That's a movie from your time.
Sounds
Minority Report. It was Brad Pitt, and he had these like this way of predicting future crimes, right? That they would predict future crimes and stop people from committing those crimes. You know, but there's no such thing. You can't do that. They didn't commit the crime. You can't punish someone for not
Yeah,
doing
but
something.
A girl walks in to an Islamic, let's say everybody's Muslim,
Yeah,
it's an Islamic country.
yeah,
She walks in and says, I want to have an abortion because I just don't want the kid.
yeah. But who's gonna give it to her? The doctor. If the
Yeah.
doctor's caught, he's gonna get in trouble. So it's a moral code you enforce on yourself. So even in the United States, even in Florida, even in Alabama, you can get an abortion anywhere. You just have to have willing participants who are willing to break the law.
No,
You get what I'm saying?
no.
You have to have willing participants. So that's what
No,
following
it's
the law.
inside the law.
Excuse me?
It's with the doctor's allowed to have.
No. So let's say they can't. Let's say in the United States they canceled all abortion. There's still a possibility of an abortion happening, of course. People will leave the country to have an abortion.
Well, that's what I'm saying. When you say
You can't. It's not enforceable. It's personal. You have to follow it. You have to do it.
I think I'm getting confused with. But when you enforce it, you're saying.
No, you're not.
Isn't that enforcement?
No, God enforces them. You'll be accountable for that with God.
And then you can back up what God says.
No, brother. What I'm saying is that if you are found to have committed an illegal act,
And you get punished.
yes,
So what's the punishment for abortion?
I have no idea.
Blood money.
I don't know. Blood money to who? The mom? No, I don't know. What?
I don't know.
She just killed somebody.
But like,
I'm just saying.
In terms of the hands of thieves being cut off,
yeah,
regardless of the argument over what level of evidence is
Mhm.
needed, whatever in your mind that might be, do you think after a certain point, like you can cut off their hands forcefully, or do you not maintain that?
I would maintain. Yeah, no, obviously you can. You know, there are punishments that are enforced.
So,
That's what the fiqh is, right?
So a Muslim country can, whatever
It-
the level of evidence they're requiring, but
Yeah,
whatever it is, if it matches that, they can
Yeah.
cut off the hand of the thief.
so again, I would say that you would have to subjugate yourself to that punishment.
So the thief has to consent, or you can't do it.
You consent by living under that state.
Yeah,
So you can always leave. You can say you're not a Muslim and say you're a Christian, right? But you know what I'm saying?
when you live
You have to consent. So in every country, there's social contract. You're consenting to the laws of the land, right? And so inherently, you are consenting by living there. But what I'm trying to say in Islam is that the underlying not even motivation, the underlying principle is that it is self-enforced, and it's self-enforced. It's up to you. Again, I wouldn't expect, like, in my mind, like, for example, raids to see if people are committing improper acts in a club or something. Like, oh, you guys are selling alcohol, let's smash the alcohol and raid this place. I don't really see something like that happening.
You mean you don't agree with it?
No, I don't. Even during the time of the Prophet, they would have drunk parties, and he didn't really like. He would reprimand, be like, "I heard about this, but there wasn't like any forceful punishment against it."
There were punishments that were like.
Yeah, there were,
especially
but
for like adultery, like
yeah, but
you know, they were punishing people.
but there's been instances where the prophet, like someone would come to the prophet and say, "I did this act," right? And the prophet would look away and just not act like he didn't. And then they would tell him one, two, three times, and then because that person came and like, I want to be punished for this. I want to subjugate myself to this moral code, and that's what I'm trying to say is that that's the underlying principle in the Sharia, in Islamic moral tradition, is that it is personal. And when we talk about like a state enforcing that, again, in Islam is very different in terms of what is the role of the state, what is the role of like the president or khalifa, right? We were talking, it's different, right? It's very, so that would take us into like, what is Islamic governance and what is this, like, what is that? What does that mean? So we kind of touched on it. We were here for Salat al-Jum'ah. Sayyid mentioned the institution of imamat and the institution of khilafa, or the khulafa. So in Islamic tradition, there's been two ways that authority and social political authority and governance is created, right? There's this idea of imamat where someone is divinely appointed, and there's a specific way that it would be implemented under that person, right? Then there's the three other options in terms of khilafah, in terms of how is someone appointed. It's either by power, like you forced your opinion on them, blood, you are appointed by someone else previous, or what is it, a power appointment, or a consensus of people agree to you, agree, ashura, a consensus of people agree. So those are, I guess, the four different ways that authority has been expressed in Islam. Us as followers of Ahlul Bayt, we follow the idea of imamat, that and when it comes to authority and governance, it is divine. And so and again, from what we know about the Imams and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we don't have much of an example, I would say, in terms of how it would be acted out. I think there are clear examples in how the Prophet acted in Medina in regards to these things, and I would say that he was, I would say, extremely liberal in terms of enforcement, and I would not say that he enforced in the way that we currently think of enforcement. And the other thing is that we starkly disagree with the way Islamic governance happened after the Prophet. So so what does it mean to have an Islamic government or Islamic? Again, I would say that most Western philosophy, most of the Western traditions is a top-down approach where you have the power and it goes down, right? You have the political institutions, you have the political power, and then that governs the people below. Whereas I think in Islam, it's probably to bottom up, where in the governance structure, it's individual people following a certain code, and then even though there's still this imam that's appointed by God, this is like when it comes to a social contract. One of the things that happened for the Prophet to come to Medina is that he was called for, like, he didn't go until the people requested it of him. He could have left to Habasha at any time. He didn't leave Mecca until he was called to be the leader, right? And so it starts at the bottom where everybody's following this moral code and wants this code to be implemented, and then it shoots up where it's given.
I think it'll be interesting to see how Imam Mahdi enforces that when he comes back.
Again, I don't think it's enforcement. One of the big things, especially when you mix politics and religion, it's one of the really big things I don't like about Wilayat al-Faqih. I really is that it completely gets rid of this idea. Is that no, it's a top-down approach. The Faqih is the person who understands this fiqh or the sharia best is the one that's supposed to govern.
What would be your alternative then?
It's the people.
Let's say you had a majority
Yeah.
Shia country.
Wilayat, there's a alternative theory. It's called Wilayat al-Ummah. It's that the wilaya, the authority, it belongs to the people. It's a very direct, democratic. It's
So they would directly just vote on issues.
exactly.
And how would they like vote for like a leader, or like how would they govern themselves?
Yeah. So Islamic governance is a very interesting idea. I would say that I'm actually doing active research in it, and there isn't a lot, right? We don't have the same intellectual depth about governance in the material world, right? As the West does, right? We didn't have an enlightenment. We didn't go through monarchies and then, the parliament fighting with the monarch and then eventually coming up with a constitution and, the U.S. Constitution, a great, one of the greatest documents ever put together. We didn't go through that. We didn't go through that. The Muslim world did not, because I think that idea is a little alien to us, especially this idea of nation states, and the idea of having a constitution that is completely material, devoid of God, right? Even though like the natural idea of God is enshrined in the Constitution, protection of religion, but the the structure is completely secular, right? You have three branches of government, and that's how it's developed. You have a constitution. It's completely secular in the terms like there's no divine institute. You don't have to follow anything divine, right? There's no divine inclusion. The divine isn't included. And so there's been a lot of more recent intellectual. So Wilayat al-Ummah, I think, is by Shahid Baqir al-Sadr. So he even came out with Iqtisaduna, a book about like Islamic economics. That was during a time of like refutation of Marxism. So a lot of what you'll see is that actually the intellectual diversity and struggling with these concepts you'll only actually find in the Shia world, in Qom or Najaf, because those are like intellectual institutions that have persisted for a long time, that are actively theorizing about these things. You won't find that in Azhar or the University of Medina, and so the scholarship you do find about these is like Islamic governance. You find it in the West, and so there is more occurring. But yeah, that's why it would be good to like see what you guys think about like what does it mean to have an Islamic government. And I am, like I said, doing active research on this idea because there isn't. We haven't really struggled with it the way the West has. We've always had the default of because of divine, right? And the Khilafah is divine for the Sunnis, and the Imamat is divine for us, in terms of like it's the institution that connects us to God, and from that institution we have governance. It's kind of like the Pope. The Pope. The Holy Roman Empire doesn't really exist anymore, but there's this divine connection. And I don't think that'll ever get severed, and so now we have to like figure out a way of balancing these two things, right? So if we take God or divinity out of governance, which I don't think any Muslim really wants to do. So even, you have the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, and in most Arab countries you have some form of Sharia courts, right? That are parallel to the civil court. So they still like have this underlying desire to have like divinity included in governance. But I think at this point, most of the countries in the Middle East, most of the Muslim countries, the monarchies are kind of stable because they have this. The monarch is pretty divine in Sunni culture. Is that the monarch, just like the Khilafah, has this divine authority because he has authority, and so he has it. you're not supposed to question it. And most of the other countries aren't that stable because again, we just don't. I don't know. We haven't intellectually struggled with this idea, and I think it'll eventually happen, but we got to think about it a lot more deeply. And I think we have to be able to focus in on very specific examples. And so one of the things that I always say is that I'm a Muslim living in Mecca, right? I'm not living in Medina. And so my example would be the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam and the Sahaba while the Prophet was in Mecca, because he didn't have his own governance, right? That didn't happen until he was in Medina. And so I guess it would take a deep look at how the Prophet acted in Medina for us to know how maybe an Islamic governance would start. So I would say that in the beginning, they call a leader, they call for the leader, and he comes. But what happens after that? There are appointments of governors and stuff. Something.
Just like to throw something out.
Yeah.
I've always thought a long time ago,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was Sunni, Shia, or whatever. I always thought in my mind that this Khalifa, or however you guys,
Mm-hmm.
It's always been a disaster. So it's never been.
No, so it's slightly different. So we as Shia believe that there's divinely appointed leaders.
I'm just saying, throughout history in
Mhm.
the Islamic world, in my understanding, it's always been a mess.
No,
It's never
what do you
been-
mean by a mess?
Whenever you try to appoint a leader.
No, we've had stable empires. What do you mean? Some of the most stable empires.
Like, let's say 7 Khalifas or 8 after the Prophet. And so it was whenever they.
It was that was the peak of Islam. That was the peak of the Islamic
we had
Empire.
all the
What wars?
wars. Karbala, Siffin.
That was shortly after the Prophet. That was very shortly.
That was all when they were trying to appoint.
No, but that was shortly after the death of. That was consolidation of power. That was consolidation of power, and that happened with Bani Umayyah. They consolidated power. They were very good with it.
And even till now, we don't have, so.
No, but they did. They consolidated power.
No,
There was
but
that.
like even till now, the whole idea of an appointed leader kind of never worked because we don't have one now.
No, we do. So, okay, you got to think about it in two different worldviews, I guess. It's like, for us as Shia, we believe that the Imam is the Imam regardless if he has political power. And that kind of goes back to this idea. It's not about political power that enforces these things, right? It's not about enforcement of these laws. It's not about political power. It's about believing in the truth and following the truth. So we as Shia believe that the truth was that Imam Ali was the Imam, and he is the Imam. Even though he didn't have power, he didn't have political power during the time of the first, the second, and the third, but he was the Imam.
Okay, but it was even when he was ruling, it was a mess.
But
I'm just saying. Well, I'm just thinking. Like,
people are a mess. Like humans are a mess.
It was just I'm just.
But humans are a mess.
It was.
We don't expect utopia. There's no utopia in Islam. We're not Marxists where if we all distribute wealth, we're all going to be happy. We don't believe in a utopia. You know, that's completely gone. There's no utopias.
I was just thinking about like a long time ago, the idea of leaders. It seemed to never work out.
So you still have to have a cohesive understanding of governance and leadership. In the religious sense, right, is very specific, has a very specific definition. So again, like Khalifa has a very specific definition, and Imam has a very specific definition. So it is understood in a very specific way. So I would say that the Khilafah has had a very crazy and tumultuous, maybe, history because of I would say it's because it's not natural. I would say the most natural way is to follow divine authority, right? If we're going to follow the the logic in terms of, we talked about God's existence, if he's a necessary existent, right? Does he want to talk to us? Does he send us prophets? Well, if he sends us prophets and he wants to talk to us, well, doesn't he want to send us a leader to, like, if we have disputes, or if we have shouldn't we have a guide? Well, is this guide going to come, like, is it always going to be here? Or yeah, we should always have a guide, right? And so we always do have a guide, and and that guide is physically present. And that's always been the case. And it's up to us to decide if we want to follow that leader. That the leader who is chosen by God. So again, yeah, we're gonna say something. No.
I'm just
Okay. What I was gonna say is I was gonna end by saying that what we were talking about is fully encompassed in this this surah that we're gonna read, Surah Al-Asr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I like to read the English for this verse, for the surah, just because it fully encompassed my whole talk in in 2 verses or 5 verses. Surah English, right? So Allah is swearing by the passage of time, surely humanity is in a grave loss, except those who have faith, do good, and urge each other to the truth, and urge each other to perseverance, for patience, right? So 3 verses, no, and it just fully encompasses what I was saying about following the law, having faith, which is being safe in your relationship with God, following the law, God's law, coming together with the truth, and being patient. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.